All right, it's good to see you all tonight. I would like to talk to you about something a little bit different. Tim has never quite given you a sermon exactly like this, and I expect a little bit more of a Sunday evening crowd. I expect you to be able to process things a little bit better, and I expect you to be able to go out there and use it a little bit better than maybe some other people that are listening. I would not present this kind of a lesson on Sunday morning, not because it's not the truth, not because it won't have Bible in it, but simply because it is something that is intended for people who believe but want to have a better understanding or have their faith strengthened so that they then can in turn strengthen others. I'd like to address you from the standpoint of making sure you understand what's going on in the world. The world has progressively more and more unbelievers in the Western world. It's bad. If you think that the church is immune to the decline among virtually all churches and religious organizations in America today, you are fooling yourself. That is not the case. If you believe that the young people that are growing up in our society are not being affected by the pervasive teaching of everything from evolution to skepticism to just downright worldly searches for fame and for everything physical and unspiritual, if you think they're not affected by that, then likewise, you're fooling yourself. If you go out there and talk to them, they need to be given definite reasons in order to have their faith increased, in order to have it buttressed against any kind of assaults that might come against their faith. And I hinted at that this morning a little bit. Do you all remember that this morning, if you were with us, I know some of you ladies were not, but if you were with us this morning, I was talking to you all about faith, and I said that there was a time where I had a crisis of faith when I was in the college age, and I had already obeyed the gospel. But I needed to have the simple understanding that God was there and that He was interested in me and giving me direction in life. I needed to be reassured of that. And one of the things that bothered me a little bit is that you got all these guys coming in, and when they preach to you about the Bible and about God, then a lot of times they would talk about, say, for example, the Bible and science, right? You know, stuff like that. That's fine. I have no problem with that. But guess what? What if you're not a science guy, kind of a fella or girl? What if you're not into that and you have a hard time understanding what they're coming from? Does God really want us to believe because we were able to put cells under a microscope and see how fancy they are? Do you have to have that? It's good. I know it's incredible. The deeper they look, the more complicated it gets, doesn't it? You realize this is not some simple thing that could just happen. I know that. I'll get to that. But I needed a little more. If we are going to keep young people from losing faith by the temptation of living in this open and profligate and absolutely just worldly, hedonistic society, then the way you're going to do that is supply them such an overabundance of information about God that anything that will stick to them, you make sure that's the one that works on them. Any way you can get them to consider God, they need not just a reason to believe in Him, they need a dozen reasons. Let's go through about a half dozen tonight, all right, of them, and you could come up with some more, but here are some generally, and I hope that you can get a benefit out of this as we study on them tonight. That is a fancy word, ain't it? The ontological argument for God. You're like, what did you do with Tim? And who did you replace him with? The ontological argument. What in the world is he talking about? Folks, it means exactly what it says up there on the big screen. You're reasoning to God from the idea of God. You're using logic without too many observations. Some famous people who like this kind of argumentation was René Descartes. He was a famous French mathematician and just philosopher. And so he's the guy that come up with that thing, I think, therefore I am. Y'all have maybe heard that one? A little bit? No? Yeah, some of y'all. All right, some of y'all have heard the I think, therefore I am. He's the guy that came up with that one. And what it was is from the idea, the thinking of man, he figured that there must be the thinking of God, and God likewise must be, inasmuch as He partakes of the same. So I think, therefore I am. Alexander Campbell, that many of us accuse us of following, don't they? The whole Campbellite idea, which we don't, but they accuse us of that. Campbell lacked the idea of the ontological argument. The way he approached it was like this. Campbell said, it's impossible for you to imagine anything. And a guy might say to him, he was debating this atheist, this Owen guy, a fellow might say, oh, that's not true. Mr. Campbell, I can imagine any number of things. Right now I'm thinking of a green methane-breathing, purple-eyed Martian. Well, he says, well, that doesn't exist. No, it doesn't. But you didn't think up anything new. We know what purple is, right? We know what eyes are. We know where Mars is. We know the concept of eating. We know what methane is. You didn't name anything that we don't know what it is. You just threw a bunch of stuff together, but we already know those things. Where did man come up with the idea of God if God doesn't exist? Where did he come up with that? If there is no God, how did he get the idea of God? You see, there's a problem with that. God is the being that is necessary. You've got to have him. The universe doesn't need Tim. If Tim never existed, what does the universe care, right? The universe doesn't need the earth. If the earth wasn't in the universe, it doesn't matter. Those things don't really make any difference. There is only one being that is necessary. The necessary being is God. It's just a pure argument from logic, folks. That's basically what it is. I'm going to show you something here that I'm not going to spend but a moment on. I just do it just to kind of mess with you a little bit. Check that out. There is a guy by the name of Kurt Gödel. You have to say it that way. Yeah, no, you got to say it that way. If you don't, you mess up his whole Nordic, name and stuff. He'd probably smack you or something. All right, Kurt Gödel, he comes up with this modal logic proof of God. Somebody says, Tim, I don't even understand all them squiggles up there. You think I do? Modal logic is like symbolic logic on steroids. I don't know what all that means. But he was a believer in God who was a very famous mathematician and modal logic inventor. And they use this stuff today in all kinds of different things to use for logicians and all that. Anyway, he was talking about the idea of God, and he says he must logically exist, and scribbled it all down and everything. The atheists don't really argue with his logic. That's because that's an argument just from plain old logic. Some people like that. I like it, but a lot of people don't like it. Mr. Campbell liked it. A lot of people don't like that, and so they say, I want something else. But guess what? The Bible actually uses this. Did you know that? The Bible uses the idea of God. Now, before we get to those verses, when God appeared to Moses, then God gave Moses some instructions. He goes back to the Israelites, and Moses is giving excuses. So you go and read around in Exodus chapters 3 and 4, and Moses is like, wait, I can't go back to those people. They're going to ask who you are. And God said, I am that I am. You tell them, I am has sent you. Have y'all ever thought about that name? God is saying, this is it. I'm the necessary being. I am that I am. They're going to ask about God. You know who God is. Don't act like you don't. Go back and tell them, I am hath sent you. But God also talks about himself in that way in other passages, which indicate that he is singular, he is unique, and nothing is like him. Therefore, when man got the idea of God, he got it there because God put it there and communicated with him. Exodus chapter 9 and in verse 14. I will at this time send all my plagues upon your heart, upon your servants, upon your people, that you may know that there is none like me in all the earth. What was the Lord saying? Same thing as he addressed earlier unto Moses. I'm the one, the only one, and there is nothing you can compare me to. And I'm the one that got it all going, of course. Isaiah chapter 46, beginning in verse 5, is a powerful verse where God is saying, my existence is unique. And my existence is separate from anything that you see. I am the one who has to be here. Otherwise, none of it is held together and none of it exists. Everything else is contingent. It may or may not exist and it's not needed. I am needed, God says. And here's what I'm like. To whom will you liken me and make me equal? Compare me, that we may be like. They lavish gold out of the bag. They weigh silver in the balance. They hire a goldsmith. He makes it a god. They fall down, yea, they worship. He's talking about the idol worshipers. They bear him up on their shoulder. They carry him and set him in his place, and he stands. From his place he shall not remove. Yea, one shall cry to him, talking about the idol gods that other people have, yet he cannot answer, nor save him out of his trouble. Remember this. Show yourselves men. Bring it again to mind, O you transgressors. Remember the former things of old. I am God. There is none else. I am God. There is none like me. The Lord is clearly showing that he is a unique individual. And that uniqueness means that God is the only necessary being. He must exist. Logically, before anything else, there has to be God. All right, so that's just kind of a logical way to look at it, but some people don't like that. It sounds too, they say it's too academic and it doesn't teach me much about God. All right, so each one of these arguments is going to get a little bit closer about teaching about God, okay? The next one is the cosmological argument. One time, Tyler had a buddy of his, an acquaintance anyway, and we were over at a ball game, and he wanted to talk to me because he was not a believer. And so we were talking back and forth, and a lot of times these young people that are atheistic, they are very haughty, very proud in the way that they think. And what you've got to do is you've got to bring them down to earth. You've got to let them see that they are being absolutely ridiculous. If I don't eat, Tim McHenry will waste away and die. You've got to eat, don't you? You got to. Everybody does. If you don't eat, there's your cause. The effect is going to be your body's going to waste away and you will die. Cause and effect goes on all the time. People don't like it. It goes on anyway. People try to deny it. It always happens. God is the first cause, ladies and gentlemen. Some famous people who thought of God this way and liked the idea of God as the first cause, and he is, were Thomas Aquinas, who is a famous Catholic theologian. He wrote some really excellent stuff in the Middle Ages, apart from his Catholic doctrines, of course. Aristotle. Y'all ever heard of Aristotle? One of those weirdo Greek guys? The Greeks kind of stood around a lot of times thinking about how to be philosophical and stuff. But Aristotle actually got to thinking, he thought, all this stuff out here, and it's moving around. Who kind of got it going? And he got to thinking about that. And he didn't know anything about God, so he said, there's got to be an unmoved mover. And he's a very famous philosopher, and his name was Aristotle. Somebody says, Tim, you wouldn't express it the way he does. No. And really, if I'm going to express it, you might just kind of put it like this. Something exists. You may not think it's much to look at, but something exists. You, me, the pews, the world, everything. Something exists. You can't get something from nothing. Therefore, something has always existed. That something is God. That something is God. It's just another name for God. He is the first cause. He's the unmoved mover. He is the something that's always existed. You want me to put a little more meat on the bones? Well, I got a fancier argument right there, which I'm not going to go through. If you all look at the YouTube video, you can read that slide, or I can maybe put these slides on the webpage, something like that. But I don't think you need me to get into the details of it. But there's a detailed argument that I think I made this particular one, but you can go through if you're interested to do some follow-up later on or want to review the lesson. But right now, remember, something exists. You can't get something from nothing, therefore something has always existed. Well, even the atheists don't say it's me or you. Tim hadn't been here very long at all. Some of y'all have been here a long time, you know that? But even you're not eternal. I hate to break it to you, but even you're not eternal. The earth. The atheists don't argue the earth has always been here, do they? They don't argue the universe has always been here. Well, something has always been, because you can't get something from nothing. Therefore, that something is God. That's just basically the way it works. The cosmological way of thinking about God is found in the Bible. Hebrews chapter 3 and verse 4. Every house is built by someone, but he who built all things is God. Folks, that is the cosmological argument in a nutshell, isn't it? Common sense, everyday man language. God is the one who built it all. Cause and effect. The moral argument. You got to have God because there's a right and there's a wrong. God is the ultimate good. God is love personified. God sets the standards. The laws of what is good must come from somewhere. Law implies a lawgiver. God's the lawgiver. Many people think of this as a good way to reason about it. Thomas Warren, many of y'all may have heard of in the church, he loved the moral argument. You know one of the ways in which he won against that big time philosopher that came out of Reading University over in England, and he came over to America, and they had a big debate back in the mid-1970s, late 1970s. One of the reasons why that he absolutely destroyed the man in debate is because he threw the moral argument up against that fella. That man was an Englishman, and he said, were the Nazis right to do what they did? Were they right to carpet bomb England? Were they right to kill the Jews? Were they right to do it the way that they did it? And the guy said, no, they were wrong. And Brother Warren said, basically, that's your opinion, isn't it? If you don't believe in God. You're just saying you don't like what they did. But you're not saying it's really wrong because you don't believe in God. You don't have any standard bearer. You don't have any lawgiver. There's nothing behind what you said. You're just saying, I don't like it. Who says that it's bad? You see, the guy couldn't answer him. He could not answer him. God is the ultimate good, ladies and gentlemen. Connie's brother Chad is becoming quite a big writer in the Brotherhood, and you can get through Gospel Advocate some stuff that he's written, and he loves the moral argument. I've talked to Chad. He likes it more than anything else. He's written all kinds of neat things about it. The Bible reasons this way. That's a little bit small for you to read, and I don't know why it's shutting it off on the left side. But the Bible reasons this way in many, many passages. John said, as you remember reading in 1 John, God is love, right? We know that those who love are born of God, for God is love, and he that loveth is born of God. If you have the statement made in the Bible, God is love, that is an expression that he is the one who is the father of it, that he is the ultimate expression of it. God is love personified. He is the goodness that we follow. The Apostle Paul was talking about this and preaching on it in Romans chapter 2 and verses 14 through 16. It says, as an example of the passages used in the Bible, the Gentiles which don't have the law do by nature the things contained in the law. These having not the law are a law unto themselves, which show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience bearing witness, and their thoughts the meanwhile accusing or else excusing one another. A fellow wonders, Tim, how do you know when a man is past working with? You can't do anything for him, and the church can't do anything for him. And my answer is, you know it from this right here. When they no longer feel the gospel. Now, I don't mean Pentecostalists, you don't feel the gospel. That's not what I mean. I mean feel the gospel. It is not good news, and they don't care what the good news is, because you could tell them they were an axe murderer, and they would just throw it off. They don't care anymore. They don't care about themselves. They don't care about their fellow man. Their conscience is seared as with a hot iron. My friends, if you've got a conscience, it is a proof of God that he has put inside of you. God says by your conscience, you know what you did was bad. And you know who gave that to you. God showed you what is good, God showed you what is bad, and God says you're without excuse if you don't pay attention to that. When will they find themselves without excuse? Verse 16, in the day when God shall judge the secrets of men by Jesus Christ according to my gospel. My friends, the moral argument is powerful, and it never fails. Now, it may not cause somebody to be converted right on the spot, but you're not out to win an argument. But you never lose with a moral argument. Nobody can handle it. There was a lady one time showed up at Mount Gilead. Have not had, thankfully, this experience here at Willette yet. But she showed up, and why she was in the services, I'm not really sure. Because that woman was just about the most theologically reprobate person, I guess you might think of. She didn't claim she was an atheist. She claimed that she didn't judge anybody for anything ever. Never judged a single action. I tested her. I tested her pretty hard. Okay, I said, this guy out here just stole something from me. What are you going to say about him? Well, I'm not going to say anything. I may have gotten specific, with examples to her. I'm not going to say anything about that. I'm not going to make any judgments on them. I started getting pretty rough with her. I pulled it down to where I was getting into the pedophile mass murderers, okay? Y'all know what I'm talking about? I was getting graphic with her. And I said, you're telling me there is nothing wrong with what that person did. And you look them right in the eye, and they finally backed down, and she did as well. I might have an issue with that. Don't give me that you don't judge people mess then. Don't give me that. Everybody has a standard. Everybody. And there was some little bit of her that was left in her conscience, or I believe she wouldn't even been at church, don't you think? And when I touched on that, I can only hope and pray that it got her to thinking, because otherwise she was in a bad way. No, it doesn't matter what anybody does. I'm not judging anything. Yeah, you'll judge it. If I press you hard enough, you'll judge it. That reminds me too of, I knew some guys that went off, they had a team of people going over to Russia. You remember when the Soviet Union broke down, Russia opened up and they could teach in the schools and everything. You could teach Bible over there. They didn't care. And they were teaching English by way of the Bible. Well, anyway, you would run into these atheistic Russians. They had been taught atheism for a whole generation of people till communism broke down. And these young people were really fighting back. They were like, no, we don't believe in anything. You don't need God. You don't need talking about right and wrong like that. And so I can remember I was told that one of our professors was pressing him. He said to one of these Russian boys, he said, so you're telling me it's not wrong if you were to steal something from somebody? No, there is no right and wrong. No. We were told, there's no ultimate meaning in anything but the state. So, no, there's no right and wrong. Is there something wrong then if you were to kill somebody? Well, not ultimately, no. There's just, the law of the jungle, animals and everything. Is it all right now if we steal from and kill you? And the boy said, no, you can't do that. And of course, that's all he had to say. Yeah, sure. No, you can't do that. Conscience, ladies and gentlemen, conscience. It is a powerful thing. And God says that it proves I'm there and I'm pulling you in the direction you need to go in. God is the ultimate good, the ultimate love. Then we have the biblical argument. Did you know you can prove God by the Bible? That's kind of a funny idea, isn't it? I like this one. Some people don't like it because it's like you're getting the cart before the horse. I love it because it makes perfect sense. God has shown Himself through special revelation. The Bible is a miracle in existence. What do I mean? I mean it's the product thereof. This is not a natural product, folks. This is supernatural. What I have in my hand, what you got right there in the pew, even what is digitally recorded on your little gizmo, is a supernatural product. You cannot deny it. It exists. It's right here in front of you. The Bible must be accounted for. I can tell you how man can make any book. I can easily explain it to you, but I cannot explain the Bible. Therefore, there must be a God to give the Bible. If you don't believe this word, the Bible says, you don't have God in you. To the law, to the testimony, if you do not speak according to this word, it is because there is no light in them. Isaiah 8, verse 20. Folks, God Himself says, the reason they don't know me is because they don't know this book. Somebody says, I believe in God. If He'd just do a miracle, save that person I love, change my life into something better. And God says, I'm already trying to change you in something better, and right here you go. Here it is. Explain it. How does man have this? How is it possible for it to be made? All those people over all those many hundreds of years, putting it together into one single book, concise, able to change men's lives, true to history, true to prophecy, able to predict, able to describe the world accurately, never been able to be destroyed, everything in harmony, across all the different writers, across all the different books. Man has never produced anything even like it. Man cannot explain its existence other than God is with it. Therefore, He had to have put it here. Therefore, there is a God. I like that one. Some people, like I said, think it's getting the cart before the horse. They don't identify with it. I like that one. Then we have, by and large, no doubt about it, the most popular argument for God ever given. The way of thinking of God as the ultimate designer. This is most popular because it shows more information to people about God, that He is invested in us, that He's interested in us. The argument from design is one that God makes so many times in the Scripture, I don't even know how you could put a number on it. God is the ultimate designer. A painting implies a painter. A poem implies a poet. Design implies a designer. God is defined as the designer. That's who He is. We observe design. Therefore, there is a designer, proof of God. Probably the most popular argument for God that anybody has ever used. You read about it down through the ages, one form or another. Found all over the Bible. Not as philosophical as the cosmological cause and effect kind of thing, but it is definitely something that is much more down to earth. God is telling us in His Word that there is a reason why the old world was without excuse, because knowing Him, that He is God, they did not honor Him as God, but became vain in their imaginations. Why does the Bible say in Romans chapter 1 and verses 18 through 20 that His eternal power and Godhead are clearly seen, being understood by those things that are made? God made it and put it here, and He says, you see then how much invested I have in you? You see how fancy you are? You see how beautiful everything is? You see how that it works like clockwork? You make a clock and you say, what man made this beautiful clock? They design a room and you say, what interior designer? Was it the wife? Was it you? Was it somebody you hired to come in? They've arranged everything beautifully, and yet it pales in comparison to the internal clock that you have. You look at a camera. Somebody says, I've bought this one and it's got the works. It cost me thousands of dollars. It puts Gina Bohannon's camera to shame. Where did you get the camera? Who did you buy it from? What company makes it? Oh, nobody makes it. I sure wish it could operate for as long as the human eye. Isn't that something? Who made the human eye? And somebody says, nobody, it just growed. No, folks. No. It's designed. It is wonderful. And in the design that God made, He shows us that I have used a detailed care, and I have paid attention to you, and I have caused you to be higher than any of the other creatures. You are made in my image. You are a fitting receptacle for your spirit, which will eternally go and answer for whether or not you have looked upon me and said, my Lord and my God. There are some specific arguments in the form of syllogisms that people make up and use about the design argument. These are very easy. I'll give you a couple of examples in the next one. If you can't read that, then it's pretty easy. If the universe bears the marks of intelligent, purposeful design or order, then it has a designer, an orderer, somebody that ordered it up. The universe bears the marks of intelligent, purposeful design, therefore the universe has a designer. It's as simple as that. 1, 2, 3, quod epsilon demonstratum. That means it's quick and easily done, finished. There is a God. The only reason somebody's an atheist when they look out into the world is because they have become like the animals. They do not see any beauty. They do not see any love. They do not see any design. Instead, they see haphazard frustration. And they take that frustration out on the Creator who made them, and God says they will answer for that because you can know that I am, He says. For example, if the human body possesses characteristics of design such that these characteristics could only have come about by the purposeful designing of God, then God exists. The human body does possess characteristics. The eye is one example I gave you just a moment ago of design such that it could have only come about by the ordering or designing of God. That doesn't just happen. Therefore, God exists. Somebody says, Tim, you're comparing apples to oranges. That won't work. I remember one time I was arguing with a college boy. You know, you send them off to school and they become college boys. And they get to thinking about all that stuff. And I can fuss at them because I'm a college boy. I can fuss at them. You can fuss at your own, can't you? And so I got to talking to him. And he was trying to have a conversation over the inner school chat thing, you know, where you can have little conversations and all that. So he's sending messages back to me and stuff. And I get to the point where I compare the human eye and I talk about they talk about its possible evolution, and I start talking about a camera. And you could say, wow, where'd that camera come from? Oh, it didn't come from anywhere. You see, the camera is made out of heavy metal objects, and those heavy metal objects were naturally shifted through the rainstorms, and they coalesced. And when they coalesced, it did so in a way in which it formed up that camera. Somebody says, oh, that's ridiculous. That camera performs a function. So does your eye. Well, that's ridiculous. There's actually writing on that camera. Your eye interprets and brings those images back into your brain, which in turn uses them, doesn't it? Folks, everything has its purpose. And just like that camera, your eye has its purpose. The human body, every part of it, the human body to be examined and looked upon as a wonder of creation that God has made, was designed so that God could say, you're going to look at yourself in the mirror and then tell me that I don't exist? Fool. And that's why God calls them that. Y'all understand now what the world is doing to us? They try to get our children to think that it's reasonable, that none of these arguments mean anything. And the arguments are as simple as pie. You don't get something without nothing. Even the idea of God you can't come up with. He has to be the one to get it going. And what He got going is so beautiful and so designed that it tells us you've got a powerful and loving Creator that gives us the standard of right and wrong and says you've got to account for it and you've got to answer for the words that are put therein. Ladies and gentlemen, the Bible summarizes pretty much all of this up in Psalm 139. I will praise Thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are Thy works, and that my soul knows right well. If you want to do some more study on this, like I said, you'll have access to the sermon materials, anything that you'd like to look at. I wouldn't look for me to give this too awful often. I gave it once, maybe a form of it twice over at Mount Gilead in, 13 years? So you got your treatment here after about a year. And if you want to look into some things, that's fine. Nobody generally comes up to me and says, hey, I'm an atheist, I'm struggling. So that's why I don't preach on it that often. But folks, the arguments for God are not only real, but they are compelling. And they're going to meet us again on the day of judgment. If there is anybody here who has ever thought, maybe when I die, I will not go under the judgment of our Lord. Maybe when I die, there will be some other way in which things work out in the afterlife. Maybe the universalists are right. Maybe it is that we do just out into nothing and it was all for no reason whatsoever. Maybe it is. Enough of the maybes. There is no maybe to it. There is only one answer, and that is God, who says in Romans chapter 2 and verse 16 again, in the day when I shall judge the secrets of men by Jesus Christ. He'll be there, won't He? And the words of Jesus Christ, John 12 verse 48, are what God will judge us by. He will say, did you reflect me? Were you good? Did you honor my Son and become a Christian? And there will be no excuse for saying, Lord, I just didn't know. Yeah, you knew. God put it inside of you. God put it in here. And God says you need to serve me. If there's anybody who is present here tonight and you have lost the direction of your life and you'd like to serve God more faithfully, if there's anybody here who's had your faith to waver in some way, today's theme has been all about faith. Strengthen it. Serve the Lord. Renew your service unto God tonight. And if there's anyone being convinced that God is the way to go, then Jesus has given you clear instructions. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. Come to Him. You'll never regret it. Answer His invitation, and God will save you this evening as we stand and sing.